and welcome to Patriarchy Principles, podcast where we dive into the intersection of family, faith, and politics. Podcast is designed with fathers in mind. We aim to shed light on the political issues that directly impact your household and guide you in taking informed, meaningful action. Grounded in Christian values, we explore what the Bible says about leadership, responsibility, and navigating the complexity of today's world. Join myself and guests and whoever else comes on the podcast on how to protect and provide for your family, not just spiritually, but in every aspect of life. So, welcome, Casey. Super excited to have you. Super excited for you to be on the show with me today. Casey, a little bit about you. You're a father of 5, husband, a believer, and most importantly, an American. You are trying to help fathers restore their relationships with their kids through addiction recovery, as well as being a politically active citizen, which is so important to be. You've been sober for 18 years, and you're pursuing a master's/doctorate in psychology from Liberty U. I'm pretty sure you can play as them in NCAA 25. Random thing there. But in part so you can help your field and institution recover from ideological capture and profiteering, as well as the incompetent actor. So you started your channel as a way to reignite the dignity and strength that masculinity should be, and identify that it isn't toxic to be a man. And that channel that's referenced there is your Rumble Right Dad on Rumble, YouTube, and Twitter and Instagram. So, how are you? Welcome to the show, man.
I'm great. Thanks for having me. Glad for what you're doing.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. This whole thing kind of came out of, I don't want to say nowhere, because it was an idea that I had been thinking on for a little bit. And then I had an interview that happened, and then I'm like, man, I should do something more with this. And so we're doing something more. We're following that little inclination. So before we do jump too far into the discussion here, I want to just give a Bible example that's going to kind of set the tone for us today a little bit. So I want to talk about Noah and the addiction of alcohol. How fitting, right?
Mhm.
But so we all know the story of Noah. He was one of only 8 righteous people living in an extremely wicked and perverse time. God tells him he plans to destroy the earth with a flood, and tasks Noah to build a giant ark to save his family and 2 of each kind of animal. And Noah, exercising faithfulness, does as he commanded. God preserves him and his family during the most catastrophic event the world has ever seen. It is a truly amazing story. But it doesn't end there. After the flood waters recede and Noah and his family begin to repopulate the earth, Noah builds a vineyard. And at some point after that, he gets intoxicated. Nowhere does the Bible imply the drunkenness of Noah was a regular occurrence. Sorry, an ad popped up on this page. Got a little thrown off there. So I'm not sure that we can infer that he had an addiction to alcohol, but we do see him overindulging in this account. And we see the consequences that follow. Ham comes in and sees his father drunken, nakedness, and whatever is meant by this. It's so terrible that when Noah sobers up, he curses all of Ham's descendants. So we can clearly see that Noah lacked self-control at this moment. That's the key right here that we're trying to get at. I missed the scripture here? No, I didn't miss the scripture. So did Ham. Had they both exercised more discipline and self-control, they probably would not have found themselves in the situations that they ended up in. Ham ended up being the father of Cananias, Israel's longtime enemies, and an incredibly wicked nation. The lesson we can learn from Noah here is that while alcohol in and of itself is not wrong, the results of too much alcohol can be detrimental in our lives. We must exercise moderation. Key word there. Remember that. Moderation and self-control, another key word there, when it comes to drinking wine and other drinks. And we must not allow ourselves to become addicted and enslaved to alcohol. So, with that, Casey, you have written some legislation, I believe is the right term there, but some things that you're going to be
Policy proposals. Yep.
proposals. Okay, some proposals of legislation to kind of go into this a little bit. So take us through that and what those are a little bit, or any other applicable parts of your story here that you'd like to share.
Sure. So it is election season, of course, and I'm from Ohio, so I'm in Southwest Ohio right now. My wife and I and our kids just moved to a homestead parcel. It's not a huge lot of land, but we have a little space and we've started raising some animals and things like that. And we actually moved here to Franklin, Ohio, which is just north of Middletown. Well, we're a little, whatever, close to Middletown, which is where J.D. Vance grew up. And of course, J.D. Vance is one of the two senators at Ohio right now and the vice presidential candidate under Donald Trump's ticket. So I've been working in recovery activism, and I'll have to confess, well, I've been a counselor, a social worker for about 12 or 13 years, and about 8 years ago, I started working in the nonprofit spaces, and I founded a nonprofit called Dayton Recovers, which we're just south of Dayton, Ohio now, and that's where we were living at the time. And I worked in a lot of spaces that were very left-leaning and sort of, typical what you would think of a social activism space. Now, a lot of who existed in that space were also the church. So it would end up that a mother would lose her child to addiction, and so she would start a ministry per se. And then there were the typical social actors, everybody trying to, tread new social ground in the other camp. So those two elements coming together, I found myself somewhat in the middle. But during that time, as sort of learning how to found a nonprofit and doing all the work that has to do with like activism, and learning how to be an activist, I found that our world had started to go in some directions that I naively was an independent and more libertarian. I voted libertarian in 2016 and really sort of had been raised in a household or like just in general dynamic of, Republicans are evil, and conservatives, everything conservative is over dramatized and it's just, they're horrible people. But during the George W. Bush years too, I was coming out of high school and into college, and when the Iraq War started, that was something that sort of turned me off towards conservatism in general, although that didn't necessarily speak to conservatism. I wasn't aware of that at the time. And of course, the Republican Party has moved way away from war hawking nowadays. I think quite the opposite. But in any case, I've always been politically active since sort of, I would say, being a left-leaning independent towards becoming I don't know if it's possible to be much more conservative than I am, which puts me a little bit at odds with my position in recovery advocacy or addiction
Oh yeah,
policy advocacy,
most definitely,
because
man.
most of those folks are like, working from the left inward, not the right. So in any case, I've seen a lot of solutions that are proffered toward addiction policy or just how we treat people with an addiction problem in the last 10 years. I was part of, or at least aware of, the movement toward decriminalizing all drugs, which started probably about a decade ago. Ilhan Hari has a famous talk where he says that the opposite of addiction isn't recovery, it's connection, or whatever, however he phrases it. There was a lot of like, oh, well, you just connect with people, and if you just are compassionate enough that this would be better, everything would be better. And so a lot of folks took that sort of stance toward addiction policy and said, well, if we decriminalize drugs and we do a lot of harm reduction techniques, which are things like Narcan provision, which actually is I'm quite supportive of, but also like safe injecting sites, needle exchanges, other things like that. If we just do all those things and make it as easy as possible for these folks to survive and in some ways perpetuate their use, they'll see that connection and those things will lead toward recovery from addiction. And societally, you're aware, I guess, being in Washington State, societally that hasn't played out well.
No,
And
it
I would
hasn't.
say from a from I'll give credit where it's due. The beginning of that movement started in Portugal. The decriminalization of all drugs was like a Portuguese idea where they took a lot of the money that was saved through criminal justice expense and put it into programs like what I've offered towards the Vance camp, which is things like employment is one way that they really entered into it to try to like provide meaning and value for people apart from, if they have options, once they stop using, they might, move into a category of more meaning. And I'll just be honest, we didn't perform it well here. Not that I think this isn't like communism where I think the real thing just hasn't been tried, which you'll hear the argument from the left a lot. I think it's been tried. San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, other Denver, which is where I'm originally from. All these cities are very much more in the decriminalize everything. Everything is fine as far as drug use goes. And it's not that it's not necessarily able to be prosecuted, but a lot of the DAs just won't.
Hmm.
And that has actually taken over a lot of cities, including medium-sized cities like Dayton, Ohio, where I'm from. So that had the jury's out or it's in now, and there's just nothing good coming out of that. You know, there may be more Narcan available. There may be more treatment centers, but both of those things have not led toward the total recovery environment that America needs, truthfully, and that is probably possible, but just not the way. We can't go with false compassion or with misled compassion and have it land. It's just not landing. And I suppose that 10 years ago you might have been able to convince me that it would, but just in the last, even just the last 4 years, we've seen so badly how um, letting people remain homeless, letting people remain addicted to drugs, and calling that compassion has really dissolved a lot of our trust in our institutions and the safety in our major cities.
Yeah.
So that's what led me to try to write down some things for Vance's office. We have a Governor DeWine, and I should say, just um, being fully transparent, in the last few years, I have helped campaigns. I have been a part of public relations for the Republican Party here locally. So ever since COVID and the tyrannical legislation and other things that came about, and the attempt of the government really to put so many. I'm actually more like a classical liberal in that freedom and liberty it matters immensely to me.
Mhm.
And so when you start telling me I can't leave my house and I'm supposed to snitch on my neighbors, things I just it was like, that's it. I have to start political activity because this may not be a solely politically solved situation, but I can't look my kids in the eye 20 years from now from the gulag and tell them that I didn't even try to make a difference when it mattered. So we've campaigned a little bit, helped campaigns, and sort of tried to be politically active since we saw that that might be necessary in our family. And so we've gotten the opportunity to meet JD a couple times. We've heard him speak in person, and I knew that his hometown, his mom actually has a connection with a family we know that lives, here in Middletown. And she's actually in recovery for the last 10 years as well, which he announced during his RNC speech, and everybody gave her a standing ovation. And so I thought the timing was right for me to try to get in the ear of a man who obviously has like his life has been hugely affected by addiction. And he's, basically we're hometown homies at this point. And so I thought if I write something up for his team, regardless of how they might use it, I'm going to offer some different solutions that they're just not popular because they're not politically expedient. I don't think a lot of people are not going to love them. So, but I actually offered it to just about everybody I could in order to try to beat the drum because I think people are ignoring some things and some trends that, having worked in the field and serving tens of thousands of clients, I've just been witness to that maybe people are ignoring, maybe they're willfully blind. Yeah, so I decided now was the time. And if he rises to vice president, then we'd have a lot better platform to stand from in terms of how he can address this issue.
Absolutely. That's incredible, man. And I love what you said about, how things change, because I grew up in between Washington State, Hawaii, and California for like my childhood. So I always grew up like on the left coast, more or less.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because my grandpa, who I lived with in Hawaii, was always very like right leaning, very like because I also grew up LDS. I'm no longer LDS anymore. And so I grew up on the side of things where it's like I'm growing up in all these like blue areas, like super blue areas. And now but I'm like not fitting in because my ideas are a little bit different. Like I don't see, I don't see these things. They never made sense to me. They never made sense to me growing up. Like why are we pushing all these things? Why is it not okay to say certain words now? Why are you so sensitive? Because I went to high school in Oakland, California. So I went to high school in the Bay Area. That's like my
Yeah.
hometown, East Oakland, straight out of the hood, pretty much. And so I know, believe it or not, I have another podcast called Biracial Broadcast. Okay, go look it up. It'll make more sense after you see me on the video here. But I grew up and I just saw all these like people that were always just like rah like something. Even in the church, even in the Mormon church, there was always like intense progressivism and like we had gay members in our congregation, which was fine. Like I never knew anything wrong with gay. Like these are cool people. Like yeah, he's gay, but still a good dude. Like I never saw anything wrong with it because I'm like it doesn't affect me. It's not my thing. It's not my business. That was what my dad always taught me. It's like not your business. Doesn't affect you. Move on, kind of thing. And let me tell you, growing up in the Bay Area is weird. Really weird because there's always something political, whether you know it or not. But I'm like a teenager and a kid, so I'm not really getting it. And so move on to go to college. I go to college in Idaho, and I live in Arizona. So I'm living in like pretty red areas. This was Arizona, like pre 2016, and so like I couldn't even tell you who I voted. I'm pretty sure the last 4 elections I have voted. No, not 4. I can't count. Last 3 election, I voted red. President wise,
Yeah.
16, 20, and 24, which I never like even questioned like for myself. It's like, oh yeah, well this is always the side I lean on because of my grandpa and everything else. I'm like, this side just makes more sense. Like this side just has more values. It makes more sense to me. I became a father in
Sure.
2017, and so it's like this. This is where I like line up because this makes more sense for myself and for my kids for like long term like success. And so then moving
Mhm.
back up here to Washington in 2020, I was thrown a ton of curveballs because I did not know like what Washington was come 2020. And then
Yeah.
so I live on Eastern Washington. So I live in Eastern Washington, Southeast Washington. I live in the Tri-City. So I'm like 3.5 hours removed from all the wokeism
Sure.
and everything. Like the community here, there's a flag down the street, like Trump flags, like down the streets. There's people getting election that have Trump endorsed on their signs and whatnot. So it's like, okay, this is cool.
Mhm.
There's there's red, white, there's American flags flying, which my take on American flags, if you're American owned business and you're made in America, you should 1000% be flying an American flag in front of your business, no matter what kind of business it
Amen.
is. Like
Mhm.
that's just my stance. Like if your business is founded in America, you fly a American flag. If this is a land that gave you the opportunity, then you should have a red,
That's
white,
right.
and blue flag in front of your business. Um, then if it's in the state, then your next flag should be your state flag. And then
Yeah.
throw up a third flag if you want to throw whatever else up. Probably shouldn't, but you can. No problem with it. But recognize the land that gave you the opportunity. Recognize the land that you're making your money
Mhm.
in. Things like that. That's my take. So, all that being said, I also work in mental health. I'm also been seeing addiction firsthand in my life. My biological mother is an alcoholic. I don't know if she is in recovery, ever got to recovery. I don't know what her. I haven't talked to her since I was like 15 years old. Uh,
Okay.
more than half my life now, just because of the addiction. That was my choice. She's never met her grandkids. She's never met my wife. None of that. You know, none of it. I haven't talked to her since I was like 15, like I said. And so like I've seen addiction firsthand. I also work in mental health. I'm a mental health clinician. I have my master's degree in developmental psychology, and so this is like
Good.
right up my alley here. So it's really important for me because it's addiction destroys families, right? Addiction of many
Mm.
kinds destroys family. To wrap it back to the Bible, there, Noah's addiction led him to being found by one of his children, Ham, and then he casted Ham off because he was you know, in that moment addicted, and he was found, he was caught, and he reacted, and he reacted poorly. But we still love Noah, Cananias, and those people. They were still loved, right? They're still loved by God. And so there is something huge to that connection aspect, right? But it backfired in Portland. It backfired hard
Mhm.
to where they flipped the switch and said it's all legal. They weren't ready for everything that was to follow after, to the point where in the last year or so, they've had to rescind all that legislation and draw it all back. But yeah, you can set up these spots in the recovery centers and treatment centers. I'm sorry. You set up treatment centers. So you're treating it after the addiction's already happened, maybe an overdose or something, right? And I'm also a big fan of Narcan. I think Narcan is great. I've taken multiple Narcan trainings. I think it's great for the moment, right? For
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
overdosing happen, and you have Narcan on you, you're able to help whoever it is, because then you're protected under Good Samaritan laws, and it's fantastic that you can do
Mhm.
that when you see someone tweaking on the streets. Because I mean, let's be honest, wherever you go these days, damn near there's someone tweaking on the streets. I'm a big believer. I haven't done it myself, but I see the benefits, the studies and whatnot for psychedelics to help treat these intense levels of addiction, meth, fentanyl, things like that are really hard to get off of. I fully support that, even though I'm Christian. Drugs and whatnot, I think that's a very holistic approach to treating addiction. But these are just,
Can I share with you about that a little?
yeah, of course.
So there is I've been privy to some of the people who, and actually I had an individual adjacent to me that used psychedelics, and he went to South America, did the ayahuasca thing. God only knows how you can afford that when you're trying to come off of other substances. But
Right.
in any case, he found that to be very fruitful for him for, at least an abbreviated period, which was great. And although he was an atheist, his conclusion was that because it removes the tangible so effectively, and you start to see some of the dynamics of matter and energy and things like that, that it actually provided a spiritual experience for him that showed that like what you see isn't all you get, right? There's more than
100%.
what you see. And that was his conclusion as to why psychedelics were effective for him. And I thought that was really candid and wise because there's really no good research about why someone can say that psychedelics might have a positive effect for. It says that it does. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
There
because
is
yeah.
research that states that it helps, but I'm not sure that anybody can put a finger on why. We know so little about the nuance of brain development, and even we can measure things via scan, but we just can't say why they work. And I thought that that was a really smart intuition about why that might be helpful.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think as humans, we are limited, right? We only can see light
Mhm.
so fast. We only can hear sound so quickly. We only can, walk and run so fast. We only can feel the wind so fast hit our skin and process it in our body, right? Our brain can only process at a certain level and up to a certain level, right? Because we're human. And so that goes to show like what else is there going on literally around us right this second that we can't even see happening. What are those things
Right.
happening in the sky, in space, literally in front of us? Like, is it wind or is it angels running around us that we can't see? Is it like what is it? So it's interesting to think about. I love thinking about that kind of stuff because it's like, what is it? And don't even get me started. Like go into ChatGPT, go to the Cosmic Dream GPT, and start asking it all these
Mm.
questions and stuff, and it'll blow your mind. Um, it's really cool. But regardless, the our conversation today, like, so this plan that you've put forward for JD Vance as a team, and you also shared how you kind of came to this point where, yeah, maybe the left isn't for me, and that's happening. I wanted to hit that before we run into the legislation here, for the back
Mhm.
half of this, but it's happening more and more. Like I see more and more stories coming out about how people who were left leaning, even my dad's like, I can't do that anymore. Even
Good
though
for
I'm in
him.
California, like I can't. Uh, like do we like it's just tired. Like people on the left are just tired of it. And the one thing
Hmm.
that's really getting him and a lot of my family even is the identity politics. It's all identity
Sure.
politics. So this coming out during the peak of the election season, like the pinnacle, the absolute pinnacle. A couple weeks before the election season here, before you go and cast your ballot. But you know everything, and so but it's recorded back in about mid to late August here. It's been all identity politics. It's been white women for
Mm.
Kamala, multicultural people for Kamala. Just every single fucking race box that you can hit is being hit. And I'm seeing it. It's like, yeah, I fit into I fit into the multicultural demographic, but ain't no way I'm like putting myself on that side. No chance. Because it's just all identity. That's all they're doing is just playing identity politics. They have no other game except for identity
Yeah.
politics. And it's sad because that's all they got for her is just identity politics. And so,
Well, so the quality of the idea related to liberalism have sort of reached their natural conclusion. Their logical conclusion is we've played the civil rights movement upon so many other categories of identity. And this was part of what happened in the addiction arena too, is this is an identity. It needs its own civil rights movement. Here we go. You know, the AIDS, HIV crisis, that had its own civil rights movement. And of
mhm,
course, the gay, a gay marriage and all of those. So they keep having to find another victim class
mhm,
to make a civil rights movement about in order to sort of galvanize that coalition that's loosely formed around like who can be the bigger victim. And so we found that even in the course of the last decade, we've moved from, well, gay rights, was probably still a thing. Obama, during his original platform, said, marriages between a man and a woman. Of course, that went way different over since of Bergefeld. And so even in the last 10 years, they sort of got pushed like, okay, well, we've done that. Where's the next? And they're just having to continually find another victim class. And now you're even seeing with, the Kamala nomination and, well, it wasn't truthfully a nomination, the Kamala appointment and some of the pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian groups,
mhm,
they're like, well, African American grievance politics versus Palestinian grievance politics, and they'll even meet, protests will meet in the middle, and they're even clashing between each other because when you incentivize victimhood, you get victims. You will continue to perpetuate
mhm,
victimhood, and whoever wins the biggest prize gets the top of the hierarchy. So it's sort of a reverse hierarchy of what we would ordinarily make a competence hierarchy. It's now just a victimhood hierarchy. And so you can only take that so far. I mean, we can keep inventing new humans, new categories of humans, but then you push out even the regular, gay guy, white gay guy from 10 years ago, he already feels like, where did the left is leaving me? Where did they go? I used to be their soldier, or I did work and left, and now he feels left behind too. And I'm not speaking from experience personally, but I also think we need to, and my experience was the left did leave me. However, this is one thing that drives me crazy about the identity politics. Everybody talking about their lived experience and how no one can speak to anyone else's lived experience. That is the most gigantic crock of crap that could ever possibly. You can't talk about polity or a group of people without speaking into someone else's experience. So
mhm,
it's impossible to set policy unless you are willing. Every policymaker can't possibly have the derivation of everyone's experience that's under their care. So, I am allowed to speak for other people's experience. I wouldn't say, Jay needs to do this in his life. That's not my framework. However, I've been a counselor for long enough to know that without me providing a worldview alternative for people when they come into my office, I'm not doing my job because I do believe there's truth. I do believe there's a right way. And I do believe that they'll benefit from that way. And if I didn't, then first of all, I shouldn't be living it. Second of all, why would I even be there? Jean Piaget and Sigmund Freud, for goodness sake, they don't have enough to speak on this person's life for me to counsel them. There's not enough there. To be frank, most of them I don't think knew that much about what they were talking about. So, we have to speak our worldview upon others. And I come from that biblical worldview, which, by the way, I was thinking your Canaanites, that turned into a really long-standing issue with
Yeah,
the
long time,
Israelites and Canaanites.
right?
So, and they fought many, many battles over, this one lost, nuanced relationship early in the life of Noah and his kids. So, in any case, yeah, it's time for us to be able to actually provide those alternative worldviews, and that's part of the reason why I wrote that alternative for Vance, because our approach, and we'll get into all that, but our approach has been almost completely wrong in that the numbers are researchable, people entering treatment and people in other arenas of attempting to get sober, they just fail at a colossally high rate, a colossally high rate. And I know addiction is tempting. I'm in recovery myself, but we have to start to rethink this. And a lot of what the rethinking is an actual prevention
Yeah.
in terms of preventing the meaning crisis that occurs in someone's life when they think that substance use is a better alternative to what's presented them.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly where I was thinking. So I'm glad you brought that point up there. Like the preventative measures, right? What industry in America takes preventative measures? What industry? Like the military does some training, right? The military trains you to, be able to protect yourself, go into battle, go into combat, go to these things, do these jobs. Like the military may be the only one. Um, Outside of that, does modern medicine do that? No. Pharmaceuticals? No. Mental health? No. Um, and it sucks because I work in mental health. Like I'm a mental health provider. It's You don't come to counseling before you have an issue. You come to counseling after your issue already happened and now it's
Right.
perpetuated and now it's affecting your life in multiple domains, kind of thing. Um, Postpartum care. That's a big one that I have found myself more and more like advocating for, like the postpartum care for both men and for women. Is that there's
Mm-hmm.
no like prevention. Like I see posts all the time in different dad groups about how I hate being a dad, like yada yada yada. It's like, bro, like you've had this the whole time. It's just now it's kicked in 3 years. It's how long it took, but
Mm-hmm.
you've had these signs and symptoms for 4 years, going back to when you found out you were going to be a dad of this child, right? Like postpartum depression doesn't just happen after birth. Like the signs and symptoms are there. So something that I'm a big part of or a big advocate for is postpartum mental health, and prepartum mental health as well. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I really would love to see change, maybe I'll get around to writing some legislation for it. I think would be cool. But every pregnancy, every couple that has a pregnancy, if they're together or not, they are offered services of a counselor, right? They have a mental health professional working with them from the very beginning of that pregnancy. First go in, it's like boom, here's your OB, here's your mental health counselor. You're going to see them once a week
Yeah.
for an hour, 2 hours, whatever the situation is. If they're together, great, an hour. If they're separate, 2 hours, great, whatever. But that goes along with every pregnancy and whatnot. We would have a lot healthier children. We would have a lot healthier relationships. I can almost guarantee the divorce rate would go down, and we would start to bring back like the family structure of America. Like that would make families strong again, make the family unit usable again, make the family unit meaningful, like make it mean something that it used to. Even if it's a gay couple adopting while they're in the adoption process, get what? Do the same thing. Like I'm fine with that too. Like if they're adopting a child and they have things that they haven't worked through or they need to learn and things like that to build these skills, great, learn them. Give that child an actual successful future, kind of thing. Like it all should be included in that.
Yeah, there's a book called Get Married by Brad Wilcox.
Hmm.
One of my psychological heroes. Part of the reason why I felt bold enough to return to school for social psychology is that some folks have written sort of heretical, not really, but the heresy is against the psychological. In his book, Get Married, he outlines what it takes to have a successful marriage by the numbers. And part of it was being a striver, so somebody who's like graduated college, maybe continues to try to push forward their personal business or whatever, somebody who is religious and somebody who's conservative. Those are the three categories that if you have one independently, your marriage is much more likely to be successful. But if you have any combination of those, it's exponentially more likely to be successful. And part of the reason why I believe that those coming from a faith background have much more likelihood of having a successful marriage is because they do premarital counseling, right?
Mm,
So it's part of the level setting of expectations prior to the endeavor. Even just open communication about expectations. Who's going to change the diapers in your case? Who's going to
yeah.
be up at midnight, or how are we going to, delineate the work in the household, those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
Even just, and as parents, we don't get that training ahead of time, and we probably could use it, at least in
100%.
open communication. And if it were coming from a already unmarried family or a situation where they don't cohabitate, which I'm not a proponent of either, but if you're not cohabitating, you especially need to know, how is this child's schedule going to work? Who's going to operate the driving in the morning or whatever it happens to be? Those are things that, if clearly defined ahead of time, those expectations don't turn into resentments as easily. So I think that's really wise.
Exactly. So it's more of that too, right? It's not even like part of it is, yes, working through some of those traumas, learning the skills, things like that, so you don't pass that generational trauma on. But a lot of it is just to be able to have that conversation. Like marriage, same thing. Like having those premarital counseling classes is fantastic. I go to a Calvary chapel. Our chapel does offer those, right? Especially if you want to get married through Calvary, like you have to take this
Mhm,
specific course, which is it's just about that. It's about having the conversations about those tough subjects: kids, sex, money,
mhm,
responsibilities, housekeeping, yada yada yada. And it doesn't lean one way or another. It's like this is giving you the framework to have these conversations, right? So giving you the skills to be able to have those tough conversations is really important. And it's a tough conversation. If you don't have it, then it goes exactly like you say, Casey. Resentment. It's like, why are you asking? You don't tell me what to do. What kind of thing? So it leads to that very quickly, and it can it damages a marriage. It not can damage. It does damage a marriage. 100%.
mhm.
It creates a lot of resentment. Resentment leads to, I mean, ultimately it lends to one person cheating and stepping out of the marriage, stepping out of the lines of marriage, and whatnot. I've been subject to that myself, so it's not pretty. Don't love it. Um, it damages families, so it is what it is. But let's jump into the So there's 5 points on your plan, right?
Yeah.
And so I would love to get
Yeah.
into
So,
to these points and to know, like, okay, this approach is different. It's not common core psychology. It's not common
right.
core legislation. Not common core anything that we have right now. It's going against the beaten path, but that's exactly what we need. That's exactly why I think Trump and Vance's camp are on board with this, because they go against everything that media and everyone wants you to. That's why everybody
Mhm,
hates this side of politics, because they're disruptors, they're rule breakers, they're not they don't play the identity politics, they don't do all this media stuff. I mean, it's so ironic too that you look back you look back within the last 10 years, right? The left loved Trump. He's always been on this side of things. The left loved him, right? I see my family members and all the time that are still left leaning, bless their souls, like Joe Burrow. I think it was a couple years ago. He shook hands with Trump at a UFC event, and he was jazzed up to meet him. It's like, hold on, you forgot that Joe Burrow's from Ohio. He went to
right.
you know he's he's from Ohio. He's already politically said his stance on abortion. He has talked political issues, and he's very right leaning. And so you're shocked that he shook
Right.
Trump's hand at a UFC. He's at a UFC event, of course. UFC events literally are like get-togethers for conservatives, more or less, and leftists who want to, left center leaning people, who are leaning more towards center. Like that's the audience at a UFC event. Don't be shocked. Like Trump loves him some
Yeah.
UFC. So it's just
And
funny and
so
ironic.
JD Vance was also that way too, because I don't know if you have
Mm-hmm.
read his book, Hillbilly Elegy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great read. But when that book launched, and at that time he was a Yale Law School graduate, and so this is like the gospel in terms of how Trump had won the election, because it came out, relatively close to when the election was being fought in 2016. And so everybody from the left said, oh, well, now we can get a better picture of what it's like in Appalachian type culture and how we could have missed the mark so badly about what America wanted in the election of Donald Trump. And so they loved JD Vance. He was like, their darling for a hot second until he began to parlay that into political matters and having his own campaigns and things. And then all of a sudden he was ostracized as, you're evil too.
Hmm.
You joined the other side. I remember I was at my alma mater, and one of the professors who I'm friends with, we were talking about his book and all that. And she said, yeah, I really liked him until he came out and tried to turn that into a political thing. And I'm like, well, you guys turned it into a political thing. However, he didn't orate anything in the book that made it seem as if he was anything, left leaning or left of center or anything. And so just because he wants to be politically active, I mean, he does have a law degree. I don't know what you
Yeah,
expected the
yeah.
man to do.
If
He's not
anyone
going to
has a
go be
law
a trial
degree,
attorney. So
yeah, if anyone has a
yeah,
law degree,
come
that's
on.
what you expect from them. Like they're gonna be involved in these issues, especially if they want to make a lot of money really quickly and really capitalize on like the youth of their career and really start to pay back all those loans and everything. Well, he was in the service, so his was all paid for through the GI Bill,
Yeah, yeah, true.
But it's like, come on, like that's that's the big ticket stuff. Politics, get in that sphere, go after it, write books, use your degree. It helps you sell books too. So.
So in any case, there's part of the reason why the proposal that I've laid forward is different is that it's going to speak really in direct antithesis to identity politics. And in a way, I don't want to claim that there's some type of grievance or allow people to buy into a victim mentality. So in no way am I saying that there's always exceptions to everything. And that's one thing in a podcast or in a social media post or anything like that. People always scream about the exceptions and they want you to set the rule based on the exceptions. There are exceptions to what I'm about to say, but I'm looking at the statistics as well as my experience in session with tens of thousands of people who've been substance dependent over the last 12 years. So it's been my experience for whatever that's worth. I have a lot of credentials if you want to appeal to authority, fine. That's not really what I'm here for either, because I think a lot of this is common sense.
Hmm.
But the first thing has been an experiential nuance and delivery of service in Dayton, Ohio. Over probably up until about 4 years ago, I would see frequently people on probation for a substance use violation. So possession, sometimes dealing or other things like that that just kind of come along with it. And then about 5 years ago, I'd say those all started drying up. So there was no one that was coming into my office on a probation that was solely a substance use charge. It was always a theft or a lot more firearm charges. So here's my conclusion. It's anecdotal. I understand that, but this is a mid-sized city and I've seen thousands of people, so maybe not that anecdotal. People in these medium to large-sized cities are not being placed on probation, nor are they being arrested for drug charges anymore. If the officer you know, sees you in possession of something, he might, take your supply and make you get rid of it. And probably not even that, honestly, unless you're committing another crime. Because they recognize that the DAs, first of all, aren't interested in levying out those charges or following that to its conclusion. They recognize that the systems, including jails and other institutions, don't have room for minor league drug offenders. And in Dayton, for instance, in Montgomery County, Ohio, Southwest Ohio, north of Cincinnati, a felony 5 drug possession is you are literally not allowed to sentence anyone to jail time for that. So they are not allowed to. That's like a local, part of their legislation out here locally. So in any case, people are no longer being arrested for using drugs. And that may seem like exactly what we asked for 10 years ago when the decriminalize everything movement came out. And there's just not an easy way to derive motivation apart from a consequence or a potential consequence. So I don't know many people that can just think, well, it's what's right for the universe. Even there's a social consequence. You know, you're deriving your motivation from a consequence, even if it's a social one. It doesn't have to be legal, right? So there's a vast need for more people to be placed on probation for substance use charges and stop feigning and signaling compassion because it's not compassionate to let someone continue to use drugs. So probation and the legal system does have a part to play. That has been drastically removed. And of course, we can get into conspiratorial. George Soros hired a bunch of DAs. They don't charge people with anything anymore and all that. And that's really unnecessary to get down that rabbit hole. However, probation and the criminal justice system does have a part to play. And when you're placed on probation, that doesn't mean I need that person to go to jail for using substance. As a matter of fact, that may be unhelpful. I can't speak to that directly. But that probation does require them to do things like at least take time out on your meth, use or whatever it happens to be, and give us a few clean urine screens before we just release you back into society with a clean bill of health or no, having never been arrested in the first place. Or major cities, it's almost criminal to let a family reside in a major city and have that type of drug policy because you're just perpetuating the problem. So anyway, probation is first in the list because I want to get it out of the way because it's actually the most minor league point. That should have already been pretty normal and intuitive, right? So probation, it would help. So secondarily, the substance use problem is majority male. Now, I know a lot of women that use drugs and drink, don't get me wrong. Again, the exceptions don't make the rule, right?
Hmm.
80% of overdoses are somewhere near there, don't quote me exactly, are male. Men die of an overdose at a much greater rate than females do. And there's a couple reasons for that. Of course, risk taking is greater among men. So, we might be more likely to start using drugs in the first place because it's a risk-taking behavior. However, masculinity has become toxic, at least by the hegemonic forces in our country at this time, say that masculinity is toxic. Since feminism, we're at a 50-50 job split or somewhere near there. Actually, women, taking over a lot more of the college graduates and having a lot more of the white collar opportunities, which women in the workforce is great. They offer balance to a lot of industries that probably need it. However, that also means that you've subtracted a lot of men from earning potential from the workforce, from being able to provide, which are meaningful exchanges, dignifying exchanges for a man that they absolutely, when they miss out on those, that's where you come up to deaths of despair, where they feel like the world wouldn't be any different whether they were in it or not. So part of this whole masculinity is toxic narrative that's been really pretty dominant over the last 50 years if we go back to the onset of feminism and some of those things. And don't get me wrong, again, the exceptions, there were some ways we needed to change. There were some ways that men needed to right the ship a bit in some of the chauvinism, and there's still some out there that are even in the right wing space that need to check themselves on some of their how they treat women, things like that. Don't get me wrong. Okay. So, but the vast majority of the men who come into my office and are fathers, but they've been estranged from the mother, they have, and especially now with a drug charge on top of it or a firearm theft, they have a drastically lower chance of seeing their children again than they should. And not just seeing them again, but having a meaningful part of their children's lives. The reconciliation for fathers after probation or even just after estrangement period, doesn't matter if they've been a criminal recently or not, that reconciliation is darn near impossible. And I've had men that were, the mother wants it to be impossible. It can be darn near impossible.
Hmm.
I've had men that have been sober for 2 years that I've been writing flowery letters for 2 years about how well they're doing, that they still have not seen their child for the first time. If we can't give men back the foremost way that they've derived meaning and value from their lives over the course of our whole history, then men will not succeed in beginning to have the eggs, the stones it's going to take to get sober and to remain sober, because the value that they get from a dopaminergic, from a neurochemical standpoint in holding their child is like nothing else that ever will exist. The only thing that compares to using a substance in terms of the neurochemical reward over time is going to be being a father. So we have to restore men to their children. Yeah, and they're just hopeless. They're absolutely they have no desire to try that court system, to try the family courts, to try the legal means because it's not successful. They know they may have tried already. Women are much more likely to receive access to their children, even when they're addicted, or even when there's a substance use problem. Give men back. And so this is how it works in the policy. We can establish, because family courts, bro, that this probably, they just do whatever the hell they want. There's not a law that they follow. It's just people's opinions. You have a caseworker on each side, and if they don't like you, it's a wrap. And then the caseworker on the male side, usually you're guilty until proven innocent, and even then, you can't prove your innocence. Because the charge already happened or whatever. So you just get what you get. And so men aren't crawling up that tree anymore. We have to give back uh, a, a neutral family court, possibly, or let's say maybe not the presumption of female custody right off jump. Can we have a conversation about that? That way there can be some type, or let's presume 50-50 custody and then move from there. That never, you would be sacrificed to the gods of the left if you walked out with that proposal. But men need access to their kids, and those kids thrive much more when there's a father involved. Of course, children that grow up without a dad are less likely. They're more likely to go to jail than they are to graduate college if they don't have a father in their home.
Yeah,
So
and their
it's time
literacy
for us
falls
to
off,
restore.
and those kids, their literacy falls off around, what is it, third grade, I believe, as well, or if not
What
sooner.
they're more
And
likely to be addicted to drugs. They're
yeah,
more likely to be abused. They're more
mhm,
likely to have traumatic experiences, end up in divorces themselves, or end up
yeah,
in abusive relationships. There's
mhm,
just nothing good. Nothing good comes without the balance of the feminine and the masculine in the life of a child. So it's not just what's good for the dad, right? Or for the man who's trying to have meaning in a life of sobriety. It's good for the children. Obviously, this shouldn't even be a debate or anything that needs to be said. We knew it intuitively for all of mankind up until 40 years ago. And all of a sudden now we think there's a better way because we just progressed to the end of every other, you know,
yeah,
um,
and welfare
popular view that
and
we could come to.
yeah, and the welfare system, Lyndon B. Johnson, he didn't help it at all. He perpetuated
Yeah.
the problem to gain votes, and I'm pretty sure part of his thing was like, I'm gonna have these votes for the next, I don't know, 40 years, the next generation or two, kind of thing, because I'm the one that helped them, so their kids are gonna help, and their kids are gonna vote for
It
me, and
worked.
yeah, it worked. It worked,
Well,
and so.
so the welfare system encouraged that women who have multiple kids would maintain non-marital status
Hmm.
and they would get better benefits for that, of course.
Yeah.
So, and we still recognize that that system's in play today. And so you get what you incentivize. They incentivize
100%.
not getting married, and that's what we got. And then we all got real shocked when not maybe not even everybody's shocked yet. They should be, but they all got real surprised when two parents not working in the same home didn't have good outcomes. There's a couple good resources. Brad Wilcox's book again, Get Married. The Two Parent Privilege by Kearney, I think is her last name. Her first name escapes me. But there's a few good books about this that are a little bit more on these are heretical views at this point in the public sphere, but there's some good research out there about what two parents do for a household.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
that's the second
definitely.
one. Let dads get back with their kids. Probation as a mandatory implementation. And part of the probation could be treatment too, but I have a lot of problems with the treatment industry too. That's a whole nother topic. So then this is one that JD, the third point is one that JD has as sort of a pet project because he did kind of grow up in Middletown, steel industry proximity, and he has a lot of like tariff orientation to it. And this, I think, could get me more in the door with this idea. proposal is employment, regaining meaningful and masculine employment for men that are in substance use treatment, but also really prior to that. Because if the guy's 18 and he enters into an apprenticeship for carpentry, the likelihood that he enters into substance use after that goes down, of course, by tons,
Oh,
because he has
dramatically
the
goes
ability to
down.
provide for his family, he has finances, and what he would trade to go into addiction is so much more and greater that it's a harder case to make that you would start using drugs in the first place.
Yeah,
So
I like that one. I
part
like
of
that one a
the
lot.
framework of the American economy that's been since we've gone into knowledge work. And since, a lot of what we're producing are things that are more on the technology front or the idea side, and then we send those ideas to another country where they manufacture the result of that, or they do the engineering that's necessary in order to bring that idea to fruition. A lot of what's empty in the American economy is there isn't a product to back the fiscal representation of that knowledge or of that idea. And so it would be really great. Men derive dopamine from working with their hands, from being in the sunlight, from having, and yeah, it breaks your body down sometimes in the long run if you don't take care of yourself. However, um, having the ability to sit at a desk and pay close attention to something for 10 hours a day is much more difficult for a man for a reason. We have developed, and even since Adam to now, we've evolved to get brain benefit, neurochemical benefit from working with our hands for a reason. Because we, until the last 200 years, had to go out and work in order to provide. And so you get an evolved reward for that. And then the people who did that with better efficacy were more likely to generate future generations because they would be at the top of the hierarchy, and so they would have mates. And so we've all evolved from these men who are potentially some of the most masculine men that persisted because our genes got passed down, and men who perhaps weren't as efficacious, their genes did not get passed down. And so all these generations have evolved neurochemical benefit from working with our hands. And then in 40, 50 years, we just turned it all off and said, now you, man, need to go sit in front of a desk, pay attention to one singular screen all day, and that's supposed to pay your bills and provide for your family. Now, that doesn't mean that we're less capable of it than women, but we just derive more neurochemical benefit um, from proactivity in different ways. And so that even leads to some of the reasons why ADHD may be overdiagnosed and other things like that, because we as men used to use ADD or ADHD as a superpower. Because when I needed to pay attention to two things at once and they both needed 10 seconds of attention, that used to be something that was seen as a benefit in some settings. When I'm picking uh, vegetables in a field, yeah, it's really good to have ADD. Yeah, you don't want to walk away from this, the whole row of corn or anything. But on the other hand, there are ways that men used to benefit from some of these things that we now call illness. We should not be treating men like dysfunctioning women, like malfunctioning women. Men are not supposed to operate in the same ways women's are. And you know this from being in the field. 70% of therapists are women, possibly up to, in a substance use setting, up to 80% of people seeking therapy or treatment are men.
Hmm.
And so we're treating all these men like they're malfunctioning women, like they're supposed to be able to benefit therapeutically from a conversation and from holding hands in a circle and, and being able to share about their feelings. uh, we may have needed to correct some of those things, but you cannot tell me that men need therapy in the same fashion that women need therapy and ministry for that matter. We have men's groups that we go around and talk about our feelings. Men do ministry better shoulder to shoulder than they do feet to feet.
Hmm.
We are better at proactivity than women in terms of physical things and being in task oriented towards a goal, towards an endpoint. So let men receive the benefit of some of those nuanced differences. Let them work with their hands and promote that in America. So JD has some ideas about how the international trade can generate some more meaningful employment. And of course, Trump, I think, has tried over the course of his tenure to do these things. But there's a lot of forces that are working against bringing manufacturing, meaningful manufacturing back to America. And the market will bear some of it out without government intervention. I do believe highly in that. However, we can do things like produce our own energy. Of course, men on an oil rig are more likely to succeed than a female who's going to have that job. And so
Mhm.
you're naturally generating an employment opportunity that's going to be more attuned to men. And I'm not saying women shouldn't or can't do it, but that's just not the strength, trade off one to one. So we can begin to generate those types of things that have a tangible product, even if it's a natural resource like oil or natural gas and fracking. And those things can have a tangible endpoint. It's not just a knowledge-based work. It's not just something that, I've come up with a new email diktat and that's going to drive the market. No, we should have men working with their hands. And also, as a side note to that, homesteading and even tax breaks, reducing government intervention on raising livestock and raising crops and selling, localized food. Those things should absolutely be part of it. Incentivize, you get what you incentivize. So let's incentivize people home growing their food. You can see why these things would be unpopular, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
taking
Mhm.
money out of the hands of a lot of people who've already generated a lot of power and a lot of lobbying potential. So that's why JD had to be the guy for this because I don't think he cares as much about the lobby. He's only been in government for like 3 years at this point. Same
Right.
with
Yeah.
Trump. They're not lapdogs to the lobby. Where even on the Republican side of things, Lindsey Graham's probably been in politics for 36 years. Of course he has friends. Of course they've bought and sold his campaigns 40 times already.
Mhm.
Anyway, employment and homesteading have to be encouraged. Men should work, have meaningful work that can provide for their family and produce a product that actually has a tangible outgrowth here in America. Okay, so number 4, marriage. We have to incentivize men getting married again. There's a recent statistic where, on average, even if they don't have children yet, earn 11% when they're married more than they do if they're unmarried. So married men make 10 to 11% more than their unmarried counterparts, even if their unmarried counterpart is in a relationship where they cohabitate. The married man makes more money. And over the course of their time, they have something like it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars more resources by retirement than a man who retires unmarried. Now, you would think that's counterintuitive because, you're splitting resources, or there would be the potential for divorce where a woman could take half of it. But we're looking more into the psychology of it. Men are more likely to have a desire to provide for a wife when there's a contract or a covenant, based on how Christ relates to his church. They have a desire to serve her. And even if they're not religious, that covenant means something. Men simply have more inspiration to press the ball forward, to take greater risks for the benefit of their family, but holding on reserve enough security that they would be able to provide tomorrow if I lost my job tomorrow. I need, obviously more resources than I would have otherwise, but if we're cohabitating and my wife or partner is working, there's much less inspiration for me to be a sole provider or to be the provider that I could be. So men in marriage make more money. They show greater levels of happiness. And especially with those three things that are outlined by Brad Wilcox, if they're strivers, if they're religious, and if they're conservative, men are much more likely to have a successful marriage. And people's satisfaction, the GSS is where they got this information, which is a general social survey. They just survey like 5,000 people in different states, and it comes out every couple of years. People report much higher satisfaction if they're married than if they're unmarried. And if they have any one of those three categorical reasons to have a successful marriage, they're much happier than the average person. We know that happiness and really meaning is the antidote for addiction. So Johann Hari made the claim that the opposite of addiction is connection. I'm going to update it. Not that he's totally wrong, but my update is meaning and value in life are the opposite of addiction. And so that's more where we're shooting at the target we're shooting at. You've been married for how long?
The first time was about 5 years. This time, right now, it's been about By the time this comes out, it'll be about 6 months.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
Can you describe just well, so why did you get married the second time? Why would you even want that after one that, obviously ended in divorce?
A lot of people ask me that, and it wasn't an easy decision. Like, I was on my own for 3 years. It was great. Parts of it were great. Parts of it really sucked. Mostly sucked. But it wasn't so much the marriage itself. It was more the person. It was more who my
Hmm.
wife is, how she pushes me to be, the feeling of love, the connection, and just the overall value that she brings into my life. How my girls connected with her, continue to connect with her. So seeing her turn into this mother figure for my girls has just been like really cool to see as well. So that was a big part of it too. And then just the want and desire to continue to have like a family and continue a family structure that was safe and productive for my girls to have and to rely on, and you know one that made sense, for me and for them, and a situation that made sense overall,
So it's
and overall,
perfect. It's a perfect,
just because that's what literally I'm told to do in the Bible, you know,
yeah,
to get
good
married
starting
and
place.
what point two, right? It's like, well, Bible kind of says I should get married. Shouldn't really be single for much longer. I should be actively at least seeking or trying to seek or at least praying for it to happen. And then if the opportunity presents itself, then, great. If and when the opportunity presents itself, great. I was praying for it for more than a year before I actually met her, before we actually started dating and everything. And then it all kind of fell into place after that. So, just works out.
It's a perfect encapsulation of these ideas is who she inspires you to be, the way that you can unify and make a better outcome than if you were apart, if than if you lived apart. It's kind of like one of the analyses they did was whether people combine their bank accounts or leave them separate when they get married actually had a lot to do with whether they had a satisfactory marriage or not, whether they were satisfied in marriage. And the combination forces you to go through conflict resolution. It forces you to have communication. There's just things that are better, and probably better outcomes, but more challenging. So that's why I think a lot of men might be afraid or hiding from this institution of marriage is, it is more challenging. It's harder to live with people. It's harder. You feel more pressure because of the role that you are called to play in that dynamic in the nuclear family. But because it's more challenging, and I'll steal some from Jordan Peterson in this, the challenge begets the meaning. So if you push a boulder, and this is Epictetus, I think, the obstacle that's in the way becomes the way. So when you push that boulder aside in your life and you are able to go past and through an obstacle, you begin to know your own strength. You begin to know how to use a lever to move the boulder or to how to have collaboration to move the boulder. And all those things provide lasting meaning. And the obstacle that was in your way became the way that you actually move forward from that point on. So that's kind of the way that those challenges in marriage can derive meaning and embed meaning in a life that even if you had then a substance use issue, it would be much less likely to blossom into full addiction because you would have all these incentive structures as to why you wouldn't want that in the long run because you have all these people that are counting on you. Yes, it's hard, but that is part of how we mechanize ourselves against addiction in a way preemptively. So there's your prevention piece. And then the last one, two things. The church, and I'm speaking as from a perspective of the Christian church, because not only is that what I have experience with, but I also believe that it is inherently true. And you can choose to believe that or not, but the value that the church can add or provide for somebody who's in addiction is immeasurable. And it's probably the most underutilized but expressly willing entity that's out there that hasn't been touched. And there's a ton of reasons for that. Don't get me wrong. I've been working on this for longer than a decade, more like since my recovery started. Here's why. The church, I came to know the Lord and recognized that the only reason why He saved me from the way I was behaving and who I was because of the grace that's available in the life of Jesus Christ and His death on the cross and His propitiation, so that the sin that I was committing over and over and even blasphemous against God didn't have a punishment that had to be levied in my life. It was given to Christ on the cross. And then I could live free after that. But I sort of came at it a little bit sideways because I recognized I had already been saved from myself, from my addiction, because in hindsight, I'd been sober like 6 weeks, and looking back, I was like, man, I could have and should have died then. I could have and should have died then. I should have been in prison a long time for that, over and over and over. And once I had been sober for a second and I looked back, I was like, dude, I have been rescued so many times. And I really tried to circumvent the whole higher power orientation about recovery and seeking a God of your understanding per AA. I was really trying to go around that and was in inpatient treatment, sober like 6 weeks, and facing a year in jail if I left. And I was like, I cannot take this. This is the worst thing that's I've ever been through. Even though I'd been sober and I'd been going to meetings and things, I hated it. And I said, well, I just need to take the suggestion that's been offered a lot and just pray. So I got on my knees and prayed for the first time that, God, if you're out there, please help me. Right. So within 24 hours, the enormous weight of my own guilt and shame that I've been carrying on my shoulders for ever since my addiction started, and even before that, was lifted from me. And by the time I got out of that month in treatment, I knew that everyone else needed this too. Everyone in my position needed to know that God can lift that weight off their shoulders. And so then I started to look back on all the grace I'd been given, and I was like, God, I can't understand how God would do this for me because I had behaved really badly for a really long time. And so I started to have to look into what kind of God, because this isn't a human persona that did this for me, because I wouldn't do it. Nobody measurably would have saved me if it were a person, if they were another person making judgments. So that led me to the God of the Bible and to knowledge that Jesus was the rescuer, right? Not my own goodness or inherent goodness as a person. So I've looked from that point forward into the church, and they took me in. They gave me, not only they accepted me and my substance use issues and my being loud and all those things, opinionated. They accepted me in that, but they also provided a way forward for me. Like, I had mentors that graduated, higher education, and I was like, well, I couldn't do that. Why shouldn't I? Why didn't I? And they were doing things like having a family, having successful marriages, all things that were kind of out of the realm of possibility while I was using, but also in 12-step meetings and those environments, it's just not very common to have like a common life. You sort of still participate in things that you wouldn't want for your kids, that you wouldn't want for yourself, even if you had a choice. But just because they're sober, it's good enough, and that life wasn't enough for me. And I'm glad God gave me into the mentorship that I needed to get me from Z to Alpha. So I've been trying from that point to get the church more involved in addiction by like teaching classes about like the stages of change and what to do when you encounter somebody who's actively using substances and things like that. And there's a lot of willingness, but there's so much lack of connection. So they might have a son or daughter that's been using, and that has really proliferated over the last 10 years. And so there's a lot more willingness to of people that have a personal experience with it. But the church's resourcefulness, when you lead a godly life, you're typically blessed with a lot different circumstances. And that can be like a mentor into the lives of others if it's utilized, if it's leveraged. But oftentimes, the person with a substance use problem and the church don't sit at the same tables very often. And some of that is the outgrowth of having like a godly life, right? But the church is willing, but the laborers are few. at this point. I
Mhm.
really think there's a lot of willing bodies out there. And so, on a church front, the way that the government can intervene in connecting the church and the substance use or the substance user is that they can provide for the church and for the substance user incentives that can run in both directions if they have some mentorship programs, for instance, where not an AA meeting in their basement, but somebody from the church has a relationship with someone from a probation, for instance, or another treatment center. If those relationships are blooming, then the incentives run both ways. You get maybe time off your probation, you get maybe tax incentives or other, you can get grants to work those programs, things like that. And then the church, not only do they get to fulfill the one another convictions and commissions that have been given to them, but they also increase their population by bringing in the people that are probably the least of these that look a little bit more like what the church was supposed to be doing in the first place.
Mhm.
I'll do one anecdote and then I'll be done with my whole. That's the fifth one. So
Good.
I was working across from a sober living, and there was a church that was like in partnership with them, and great guys. Both of them are ministerial, so both of them are believer entities anyway, or Christian entities. The sober living people made up about 40% of the church, which there was like 35-ish people in the church. And I was in the building trying to help them renovate some offices and stuff for use as like a counseling part. And we were in like the mezzanine or whatever you call the second deck on the church. And the church was meeting, and there was like the first two rows were full, or maybe three or four rows scattered. And I was like, whoever built this church 100 years ago expected there to be a need for a second tier to this church, and they can't even fill up 1/10 of the first tier right now. What has happened? What happened over the time that church was built until now? And God kind of gave me a conviction or maybe a little bit of an image that if this church is going to fill up again, it's going to be with the type of people that you are serving, that you're trying to get back involved with the church, not with the traditional mom and pop who have probably, been passing away from that type of lifestyle, from just growing old. And when that church was built, there was probably a lot of families. That neighborhood that it's in is full of difficult circumstances.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of like traditional families in the east side of Dayton. And so if that church has a chance, it's us. It's the people that are coming out of substance use problems that they're going to minister to, and those people that were in my situation 18 years ago where I was at when I was going to treatment and when I was getting sober, they turn into the old person who has children and who has a family and who is, trying to share the gospel if they do it the right way. So the only way that this church and the American church really in general, I believe, has a chance is if we fill it up with the type of people that are dying of these deaths of despair
Mhm.
by hundreds of thousands every year. So we have to get those two at the same table at the same time as much as we can. The government can play a role in that. It is the church's job. Don't get me wrong, it's the church's commission, but the government can play a role in greasing the wheels of those relationships.
Absolutely. And I think that's really cool how you mentioned that because it really goes back to the parable of the one, right? The one sheep that's lost. How Jesus
Mhm.
went, he left the 99 to go find the one. It's one story that always resonated with me, that's resonated with me kind of my entire life, that I just absolutely have always felt like moved toward. Even going back to preschool, my best friend in preschool was the one kid that was in a wheelchair that no one else played with. Like that was my best friend in preschool. Uh, so growing up, my friends were always kind of the ones that were like outcasts. I mean,
Mm.
growing up LDS, you're already kind of outcast, so you kind of make friends with the other outcasts, kind of thing. But
Sure.
and so it's just kind of one of those things. Or before I was, before that was kind of the group I was with, like growing up as the one kid in the neighborhood that lives with his grandma and doesn't have a mom and dad at home. Already kind of
Mm.
outcast. So you already kind of got to find the people that you're going to relate with most. I'm not trying to get any sympathy from any of the listeners or anything there, but I mean, that's kind of how it is. But 100% agree. Like,
Mhm.
if the listeners haven't watched Jesus Revolution, like that's exactly what happened in that movie. Was they went and they ministered to the people who, as they perceived, were the furthest away but who needed the message the most? Like, who is going to benefit from this message of love and hope and grace and virtue and the
Hmm.
beautifulness that is Christ? It's the hippies. Okay, cool. It doesn't matter. That's who needs it, you know. And I love that, anecdote you gave there. Like, yeah, when that church was built, suburbs, families, things like that. I bet at one point when that church was built, it was full. But over the 100 years that happened, it fell into despair. And now these people who are there are, that church is still there for a reason. But the
Hmm.
people who can fill it need to hear the message of that church. And so, of these points here, the first one, let's go back through these 5 points real quick. So remind me the first one again.
So probation
Okay, so
with
probation.
intent to, and that really has to do with also engaging in treatment.
Hmm.
But I have my own thoughts about the treatment industry and what needs to change there. There's a lot of negativity there as well. But I think that treatment can provide at least some oversight during a time where somebody really needs it. And so probation with informed treatment, with good treatment, and incentives for that to be completed. So don't let drug abusers go without having some correction because that is not
Hmm.
compassion, you know.
Okay, so probation with informed treatment. Number two was I I got so two. I know three. Three was where, but what was two again?
Number Number two is fatherhood reconciliation
Okay, yes.
and actually promoting men having children too. Obviously, our birth rate's fallen below replacement rate.
Hmm.
We have child tax credits. However, encouraging the proliferation of more children in our society that embeds meaning in the lives of men too.
100%. And that's a big part of two and three there. Three is the workforce and meaningful
Mhm.
jobs and meaningful employment, earning potential, things like that. Those two go directly hand in hand. For fathers to be able to find meaning. Family court's this whole issue. You can go back to my like 2-hour podcast I did with uh MNG, Mr. Nice Guy. We broke it down. We got into the nitty gritty of it. Spoke for 2 hours on this topic. Go back and listen to that one. Fantastic
Well,
episode here. But we broke it down how there's just so much pollution. Ugh, it's disgusting. But it should be from the very beginning. If a divorce happens, and it shouldn't even be we should always be saying if a divorce happens, not when the divorce happens. We need to change our mindset around that from the first place. But if a divorce is to happen, 100%, it should go to 50-50. It doesn't always need to go to the mother because the mother's not always the best fit for the child. Maybe that child more so is better fit with their father, 75-25 kind of thing. Maybe the mother's
mhm.
incompetent. Maybe the mother doesn't have the credibility in the court. Maybe the mother is the one causing the issue, abusing the justice system because it's very easy for women to do so. It's very easy for women to manipulate and abuse the justice system, pull something out of their ass, say this happened when nothing really did happen, but they're
And
believed
they
and whatnot.
benefit from it
Exactly.
financially too, as
Mhm.
well as with usual custody, they don't have any consequence in the custody. So women actually initiate divorce a lot more than men do now.
Yeah.
So because they've been incentivized to do so. This isn't
Mhm.
rocket science, right?
No, no.
But what you incentivize, you get.
Mhm.
So we just have to change those structures, incentive structure.
100%. So that goes into 2 and 3. That meaningfulness, find meaningful work. Fathers, if you're out there, if you're in a field that's not meaningful, uh, find what is going to be meaningful. Like, yes, you have to take a risk sometimes to do that, to go from your nice desk job that's unfulfilling and unmeaningful, and maybe step out of your comfort zone and go down to the local, union office, or go down to the electrician school or something and start from scratch, start from zero in your 30s, in your 40s, or whatever that is, to find that meaningfulness, and then going into
Yeah, so
450.
AI, secondarily, AI is coming for all those white collar jobs too. So
Hmm.
if you know how to turn a wrench, you might be actually much better off in the next 10 years than somebody who's an attorney who an AI database can use every tactic and know every law to the gnat's ass. You might actually be better off if you know how to turn a wrench than if you knew the entire law of the United States of America. So AI is coming for us, in the knowledge fields.
Yeah, 100%. Like, cultivate your talents. Like, if you have a talent with plants or with
Mm-hmm.
growing, or hell, maybe
Music.
maybe you have a green thumb. Go grow some freaking marijuana or something. I don't know,
Yep.
and sell to a distributor. Like, use your talents, use what those God-given
Sure.
talents that you've been given, right, and use them for wherever you need to use them. The fourth one was the family structure, correct? Or
Marriage. Yep.
marriage. Okay, yeah, marriage, which is, so important. We got into that one a little bit, but marriage. So they all align. Probation, and then you go into fatherhood, and then you go into meaningful work, and then marriage. Like, marriage is so important. Like, the family structure is damn near non-existent. 50+% of marriages end in divorce, and then those men don't get remarried, and now we look back and we're in a you know birth deficit for the first time ever, which doesn't
Mm-hmm.
shock you. I mean, it's just not shocking. Look at the extreme feminism movement. Look at how
Mm-hmm.
extreme that's been, how
Abortion.
abortion, agreed, and then also look at, the left's political appointment. uh can't not I don't even want to call her a candidate, but their appointee for the office. She doesn't even have biological children. She has stepchildren.
Well, and that's
I
what JD got in trouble because he said our government's run by childless women. He got everybody on the left is calling him weird for that. But in reality, I care more about the politic of 20 years from now than somebody would who's 81 and isn't going to have to even see the consequences of that themselves, let
Yeah,
alone their children. So
exactly.
yeah, it matters. It matters that whether you have kids, that matters in your politics. It
Yeah.
should.
No, I 100%. I think he stumbled out of the gate a bit, um, with some of the things
He'll be all right.
he said. He's gonna be okay, but I really don't think he meant anything by that negative. It's like, yes,
To be
like,
honest, I'm with him. You can take it and spin it in a way that makes it seem chauvinistic or in some
mhm,
ways toxic. But honestly, we all knew what he meant. And
yeah,
and he's right. Our government is run by too many people that don't have an investment in tomorrow. And they're telling the people who have an investment in tomorrow what to do policy wise. That's, of course, they would be more attuned to like what's going to benefit them now. Why wouldn't you? You don't have to think about
yeah,
that next generation. So it makes sense. He may have said it in a
yeah,
poorly, but
yeah,
I'm not. Only on the right do we get called to the carpet for that type of stuff.
for
They'll call us
everything. Yeah,
bigots, racists. They'll call us. They literally, when Trump's assassination attempt happened, so many people said that they wished he hadn't missed and all this stuff. And
yeah,
nobody gets canceled for any of that. But JD
mhm,
said something about how cat ladies are running things, and then he gets all the hate for it. So I'm
yeah.
not even worried about all that. They can call him what they want to. Normal people know not only what he meant, they agree with him. And
No,
I mean,
I agree.
if you had the chance to explain it, I think he'd be fine.
Percent. No, I agree. Which I'm pretty sure in those same remarks he probably did explain it. And he has since explained
He
it as
did.
well. He's been called out for it in interviews
Yeah,
because I guess what, he meets with reporters and he goes to interviews and
facts.
he talks in those interviews, and so does Trump. Um, Not just pre-rehearsed rally speeches and things like that, but hey, um, that's where we're at. But um, the family structure is so important to restore, to bring back, and those that's a big incentive, that makes you as a man want to work harder because you're providing. As a
That's
father, that makes you work harder, that makes you be more
mhm.
successful. I see coworkers, or not coworkers, but peers of mine who don't have kids and same age as I am, and it's like they're just kind of chilling, right? They're just kind of doing the same habits, same routines.
Video
um
games. Yep.
Yeah, they're just kinda doing whatever, right? There's not a lot of purpose. They're not working harder for anything. They're just kinda they're not chasing anything. They're not ambitious. They don't have a purpose. They don't have anything really pushing them to take that next step forward, kinda thing. So marriage, family, kids,
Hmm.
those are super important things we need. And then lastly, the church being involved in recovery. You know, there's one man who took all this pain, all this grief, all this burden, everything that we ever could experience onto himself. He bled blood from every single pore, and his name's Jesus Christ, right? And he died on the cross for you, for me, for everyone listening to this. He died. He literally gave his life. God's only begotten son. He gave his begotten son to us so that we could have life through him, right? So that we can go through this life and get through whatever may be bogging us down, addiction, whatever it is. I wish I could think of more examples, but addiction, sadness, job loss, family loss, child loss, whatever it is, right? He gave us a path forward through the Bible, through himself, through his blood, through his literal blood. I don't know anyone who's ever shed their blood for me outside of Jesus, right? I
Amen.
know that we've lost many, many hundreds of thousands of servicemen and women who have died protecting our country and our freedoms. And I salute them, I honor them, I care about them. However, Jesus died and gave his blood for us to have a better life. And so that's so important to bring the church and those who need it the most to the same table and to get them working
Amen.
together. I mean, just imagine, I can only imagine a world where caseworkers, a recovery center, church leaders, policymakers, and all those people are at the table, because that's literally who was at the table um, back then with Jesus. You know, his apostles came from all the different walks of life,
That's right.
and
Yep.
they were at the
Yep.
table. That's who he went and served. He served those literal people. Paul went around and he served all of these demographics, and he was persecuted multiple times, almost lost his life multiple times, and kept going. You know, I love Paul's journey through the book of Acts. It's fantastic. So we have the
Mhm.
examples, they're right there in front of us. Like, let's use them, and they're super important. So I love those 5 points. I love this policy. I think it's one that makes so much sense, right? It makes too much sense. Incentivize the behavior you want, give meaning back to those that need meaning the most.
That's right. That's right.
And you know, one thing I thought of while you were talking about like the family things and fatherhood and whatnot is I thought of Harrison Butker's speech, um,
Hmm.
Chiefs kicker, and then the Chiefs doubled down on it and then gave him an extension, making him the highest paid kicker in the NFL.
As they should.
Yeah, he's incredible. He's a
Really,
great talent.
the diversity of opinion is something that we are going to have to stop avoiding. We can't resegregate our society and call it progress. This
No.
is the great endarkening, the great endarkenment.
Mhm.
We are pushing all of each other back into these categories. And then, someone's opinion like his, I mean, we can play this game all day and be like, oh, 20 years ago, that would have been, completely normal. Let's just normalize it today. I don't even care that there's hypocrisy. They don't care that they're being hypocritical.
Mhm.
Let's just say that we have to find a way to come to the same table or at least persist in the same country as neighbors and be
Mhm.
okay with the fact that, my neighbor might be LDS, which I don't, know that much about the Seventh-day Adventist or anything, but on the other hand, it's cool. I can disagree fully with their opinion, and that's fine. My other neighbor could be a BLM, Marxist supporter. And you know what? As long as you're not setting policy for my country, I'm cool with that too. I might actually have more in common with them than the LDS guy,
Probably
when it
do.
comes to
You
like being
probably
able to
do.
share our children together. Yeah, so like let's get back to a place where Harrison Butker and whoever the woman was who got fired from Harvard as the president, where they can persist in the same country. And here's something I noticed over the last couple years. The gym that I go to is a multi-ethnic, drastically multi-ethnic, multicultural place where everyone comes together and we can be friends during the time we're there. And here's why. We all have a stated common purpose. Our purpose for being there is to get in good shape and maybe on the side have some socialization, things like that. That
Mhm.
purpose, that proactive, unified goal is what allows us to all persist in the same place and sort of erase some of those differences or overcome the differences that are obvious in skin color and background and all those things. And I just wonder, like, how is it that all these people get along in this environment? It's because they have a stated common purpose. We have to get back to that as a country, and I really think that's the disagreement. I think it was Thomas Aquinas who said like all arguments are at their root theological. And
Mhm.
in reality, we are simply arguing whether God exists or not. And I really think our society, the reason we can't unify together is because we can't come to an agreement, or at least an agreement to disagree about whether God exists or not.
Mhm.
And this is either going to be a great conservative revival where that question either is resolved or tabled for a time, or our country is going to dissolve because we cannot persist down the progressive path. It's just exploding. The pin has been pulled on the grenade and someone's holding onto it for dear life. And really, I believe it's the Republican Party or conservatives are holding on to the grenade, just hoping that it doesn't release and just blow up on all of us. So we have
Mhm.
to like put more hands on that grenade, like Moses when he was holding up his staff, in order to win the battle. He needed the help of his fellows in order to be able to keep holding his hands up. That's what we need. We need more hands to be able to shield us from the possible explosion that this country could go through, worse than what we've already been through. We need a revival. It's going to start in the church, but really of conservative values as a whole. And that's what this proposal is. The addiction arena does not have a conservative voice other than maybe JD, but his personal experience, there really hasn't. And most people, honestly, in a conservative realm that get into recovery, they don't lead with the fact that they used to be addicted to drugs. It's not, their identity. It doesn't become their identity. But we have to have conservative ideas about the resolution to this problem, or it will not get solved.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And, that's why we're having these conversations, right? That's why I felt inclined to do these, additions to the Young Dad podcast feed of these patriarchy principles, to be able to have these conversations that we're not having. We're not having these conversations anymore. And we stopped having these conversations. I don't even know when, because we villainize religion. We villainize talking about religion,
Mhm.
sex, and politics in everywhere we go. It's taboo to talk about these common basic things because it's about control. If we can control the narratives about religion, if we can
Yep.
control the narratives about sex, then we control the narratives about uh,
Language. Yep.
all these things. If we can control these narratives about sex, religion, and politics, then we're great. People aren't going to talk about them. They're going to go dumb. They're going to go blind. They're going to believe whatever we tell them to. Because when you have a nation that stands for nothing, they fall for anything. All these protests, you look at all the protests, whether they're one side or the other, it's all people who stand for literally nothing because they fell for anything. They fell for the side that's going to be
Yep.
that sounds best to them, to the side that said, "Hey, come over here. You're accepted over here. I believe you over here." And it's
It's
all a
truly
bunch of
critical
fathers.
theory.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's
It's
all a bunch
truly
of
critical theory at its best because they've just taken one institution like marriage after another and applied critical theory to it, critical race theory, critical gender theory. And it's really just a tear down, and that's why it's called critical. It's
mhm,
just a tear down of normality in these areas. All of what has been intuitive forever, like gender theory, a critical gender theory, and
mhm,
the erasure of different genders and sexes, all that they just apply critical theory. It's a Marxist ideal. And that's why we've gotten to a place where you can protest literally for Palestine on one end as a queer person in America, which is absolutely a non-congruent, those two things, they would throw you off a building in Palestine if you said you
literally.
were queer, or if you
Mhm,
even arrived looking like you look at this protest. And Antifa's got nothing on the Palestinians when it comes to like armaments. You would be
mhm,
done, bro. So we can't just apply a tear down and not ever build anything back into it. And this is our offering at this moment. And I'm glad for what you're doing, brother. I really am glad to get to talk to you because what we have to offer now is that alternative worldview.
mhm,
If you come into this pathway, you will have a better life. And there are young men out there that are reporting like 57% conservative, young men, like 18 years old, Gen Z. That is unheard of in young
mhm.
young people's lives.
Yeah,
Young women, of course, are going in the other direction,
of course.
but it's because men want an alternative to the toxic, being told they're toxic, being told they can't have their kids, being told that women should be taking their jobs, that they can't even go to college because they don't get the same type of benefits, they don't have the diversity status. So it's up to us now to show men that there is another way to live. There is an alternative to what the hegemonic forces in our society have told you. You can have a good life. You can be a provider. You can have masculinity as a positive attribute. All those things need to be reinstituted into, and this is our chance. And the church and the life of Christ is the foremost foundation for that. So if it doesn't
Amen.
start with that, it's going to be built on sand. And so people aren't going to like it. People aren't going to like half of what I just said about these solutions. They are all
Oh yeah.
trade-offs, not solutions,
Hmm.
to quote Thomas Sowell. But the trade-off is going to be that the pharmaceutical industry doesn't make as much money, or the treatment industry doesn't make as much money, or you have to let men stand equally in the lives of their children. Those are all things that aren't going to be very popular.
No.
But we have just the type of dissident candidates now that might take on these types of mindsets and let all else be damned in terms of the opinions of politicians and lobby groups that have basically dominated politics in our country.
Yeah, and we're not alone. We're not alone in this thinking. A lot of fathers, a lot of people, a lot of fathers, especially, are on this train of thought with us, this thought process, this thought train with us. That we just want to see a better future for our kids. We want to we want to have the impact we can now. So that's why it's important. The action that you can take to kind of wrap this all up. There's one single action that you can take. It's coming up here in a couple weeks. Go and
Yeah,
vote. Cast your ballot accordingly. Cast it for the candidate that you believe can make the changes that you want to see in our society. If you feel like that's whoever the left is appointed, then great. If you feel like that's straight down the middle with RFK Jr., assuming he's still on the ballot, great. If you feel like that's more the Trump JD Vance side, great. Go do it with whatever side you do it, but you have to go and do it. Go and take that action.
especially as
Um,
men, because men vote much less at a less rate than women do. And right now, this election might be the testing point or the flashpoint as to whether men will re-engage with politics and stop letting women do what God has compelled us to do, at least in equal measure. You
mhm,
have to take your role as a man and step into this and stop letting women do your job for you. You need to
mhm.
vote in order to at least play an equal part in that.
Yeah. Yeah. Go and vote. I mean, that's the biggest takeaway here. Go and vote. Go and take that action. And, after you're done voting, go and assess some things. Go see exactly where you're at, where you're falling. And if you're not already informed, go get more informed. Because there's going to be more elections. There's going to be more elections at the local level, state level, community level that you need to be
Yep.
taking action in and voting in. And you don't vote just for yourself. I remember I went and did a primary ballot for here in Washington State for Senate and Congress and governor and stuff. We finally have the opportunity to elect a new governor. Thank God. No more Jay Inslee. Um, and so we finally get to get him out. But I went, I voted. Wife and I, we dropped off our ballots. We had the kids in the car, and they had like little "I voted" stickers, and the girls wanted stickers. And I'll end with this story here. And the girls wanted these
Yeah.
stickers, and they put them on the "I voted" stickers. And that's when it really, 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 really hit me. I'm like, I am not just voting
Yeah.
for myself. Like, I am voting for them. Like, because they can't vote yet, but I am voting for them. Like, everything I just put on that ballot, everyone who I just voted for, I voted for them, for myself and for them. So that's when it really hit me. So you're not just voting for yourself. You're not just voting to check a box. You are voting for the future. And so that's where, my closing thought there. So
I love that. That's beautiful. So I reached 500,000 views on YouTube, and if anybody wants to look into that, it's Rumble Right Dad on almost all platforms and on X. But I wanted to know, where can we find you, just so everybody knows, because
most definitely.
you have a few things going on. So where can I find you at?
Most definitely. So if you guys want to keep connected with Casey, you can find him at Rumble Right Dad, like you said, on all platforms, at Rumble, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram. You can find myself. So Patriarchy Principles is just in addition to the Young Dad podcast feed. So it's in addition to the Young Dad podcast. It's going to be on the Young Dad podcast feed. It's going to be on the Young Dad podcast page, promoting it, kind of crossing those hairs and whatnot, because I felt it was important to use my already established feed, use the voice I have, just change the name and change the title of the episodes a bit to be able to match that, because this is a big part of fatherhood, right? Faith, politics, family, all these things. So being able to keep up with that. So it's just Young Dad podcast on all feeds. You can find the transcript of the episode, the full transcript, over on the website, ballboymedia.com. And yeah, I think that's everything. Shout out to Podbeat for the opening and closing beats of our podcast here. And yeah, I think that's it. So we'll catch you next time right here on Patriarchy Principles and edition of the Young Dad podcast.